Hello guys, welcome back to the simple MVC database tutorial. I believe this is going to be video 6. It's been a couple of weeks since I uploaded my last video. I've been working on a new feature that involves MathPlotLib. That basically takes the data we have in the database and shows it on a plot line. So let me show you what that looks like really quickly before I go over the code. Just give it a second to load up. I already have my database pre-built. I've also changed the name to database.db instead of first try. If I show records, it has 3 items. First guy email, 1000, 10, and 10. Second guy, same thing, 2010 and 10. The last 4 items have been changed. Instead of the address, it's now income, expenses, revenue, and taxes. The expenses, revenue, and taxes are 10 for all 3 items. Only the income's changed just to show off the difference in the graph. Created a bottom here that has 6 checkboxes. The name and email are for the x-axis. The income, expense, revenue, and tax are for the y. And when I click this button, show plot diagram, it expands the whole video and gives us a MathPlotLib library plot diagram. That is in Ktinker frame. It is customizable, movable. So yeah, you can basically move the plot around. You can save it as an image. I'm not going to do that because when you click it, it asks you to save right where your C drive is, and I don't want to show that. You can configure subplots. So just change some of the sliders around in order to change the dimensions. Let me just remove the top a bit. And you can just make it a little smaller, bigger, or you can just reset it. You can move to the next view, the previous view, you can go to the original view. And I have a couple of titles here that show the y-axis, which are the incomes, and the names in the x-axis. So when I click it again, it goes away. Now I can change this, so show the email and the taxes. And when I click show plot diagram, it's going to show everything. Their emails, and even says emails here in the bottom, and then the taxes are a straight line because I have it set to 10 for all 3 of them. So that's the only major change I've made. And let me just say click 2, delete record. We now have 2 items. Now it will show the original income and name. Over here it leads to an error. Why does it? X and Y format must not be none. Alright, you know what, I guess this is an incomplete table. I mean X and Y string format, they're not none. Okay, so I just took a little bit of tinkering, but it still got it working eventually. I'm gonna have to fix that in the next video, but yeah, for now this is what it looks like. So let me go over the code. Let me just clear out the terminal. Bring this down a bit. Alright, starting from the top. I've changed the variables, so rather than taking the zip code and the state and city information, it now takes integers for income, expenses, revenue, and taxes. And apart from that, I've modified the table so now it works with these new inputs for the table. Show table is the same, and the update and insert functions have also been modified to reflect the updated variables. Same for the arguments inside the functions. Same for the insert. One thing that's different, I may not have showed this in the last one, is that the show query now outputs a playlist. I'm not sure whether I made this change last time and showed it, but it now does this. I think I did show this in the last video, so I'm going to ignore it. Anyway, I've created a new function called PlotShow. This function outputs data from the database in order to be displayed in graph, which I will cover in the GUI script. So basically it connects to the database using the SQLite3 connect and then makes the cursor. It selects everything from the table, which is still named testing. So yeah, it doesn't just take these two anymore, it takes everything. Takes everything and then saves it to a variable called data. Then I have 6 lists. One is the name, email, income, expense, revenue, and tax. So for each item in this massive c.fetchAll, the name is going to be the append row 1 plus row 2. That's the first and last name with a separation in between. That's going to be saved as a list item for name. Email is going to take the email item from the data table. Income is going to take the income. Expense is going to take the expense. Every time it goes through data, it's going to go for in each table, in each row, it's going to go to the index position 4 of row. That's where the income is stored, and it's going to add that to the income list I've created here. Same for the name, it's going to go for the index 1 and 2, add them together in a string, and then save it for the name list. Same for email for row 3. Row 5 will be expenses, row 6 will be revenue, and row 7 is taxes. Then we close out the table connection, con.commit, con.close, and just like with the query function, this one returns all 6 lists. So all the data that's been saved in these 6 lists, that's been extracted from table, is now going to be returned. So whatever function calls this function will have access to that information. And delete has been the exact same thing since the very beginning, I believe. Okay, so the main changes are in GUI. So in GUI, I've done some importing. First, go to pip, install MathPlotLib. From matplotlib.pyplot, import that as PLT. And then import matplotlib.backends, tk.arg, and import figure canvas tk and navigation toolbar tk. This is in order to merge the plot graph into the tk frame, because matplot and Ktinker are 2 different modules. Thankfully they had a backend that works together, which is why I can merge them in this, as I've shown you before. And part of merging them also requires me to import figure. And then the style, you can download any style. I just chose 538 because that's the first thing that came up when I looked it up. Now I've added a few new variables. I think new playlist, filtered, yeah. These 3 were from the last video for the query. The new ones are check X state and check Y state, which are going to be strings, but right now they're set to none. And then a couple of booleans, toggle and drawn, which are false. The X check state and the Y check state are for the check mark boxes. So for the name and email, every time one of them is clicked, the X state will be assigned whatever is clicked. So if I click name, check state will be name, otherwise it will be email. And check Y will be income, revenue, tax, or expense. Here's the initial setup. The only thing I changed here is the geometry in order to make the GUI big enough to fit the plot, or at least fit the new buttons in. And here I've created a new frame. This frame is stacked at row 17 at the bottom. Inside this frame there's another frame, expanding frame 2. This one's at row 19. Actually no, it's not inside this frame, it's a separate frame. Yeah, I think this is just for the checkboxes. Yeah, expanding frame is for the checkboxes. Expanding frame 2 is the one that shows up when we click the button because it has grid.remove. So by default it's not going to be shown. But when I click the button, it will show this frame and everything that's inside it, which includes the graph. Now we have our plot title, which is a subset of expanding frame 2. That's the title we saw. It's that plot diagram. Then we have our X and Y, or Y and X axis labels. These are the ones that show the text, but by default I have the text set to just an empty string. These change based on a function that adds the text value from check X state and check Y state. I'm going to show that in a little bit. Now let me just collapse this because this is all the old stuff. Add to record, that's old. Query, yeah, I haven't changed anything in this. So this is still old. Remove is still old. Modify, modifier is still old. Yeah, close editor is still old. Create new database, it's from the last one. Close window, root.destroy, and about us. I've deleted the function that I've deleted the create. Actually, no, I haven't. It's right here. Never mind. Yeah, I'm gonna delete this in the next one because I found out that I don't need a function just to call create database because I'm already importing the main.py. In the next video, I'm gonna separate some of the functions from main.py and GUI into a new script called main.py, and what's currently main.py will be the database script. So then it actually will be the main viewer controller format that I've been trying to make this project become. Might have to reorganize a lot of the code into classes and, you know, use self a lot, the self variable. Alright, these functions are very similar. Basically, if the checks, okay, it calls check X state for name and email, whereas the income and the other ones call check Y state. That's what they're assigned to globally. Now, if var1.get, which is the checkbox, I'm going to go over that in a bit. If the checkbox is clicked, which is var variable1.get equals 1, the check X state will be set to name. Otherwise, when it's not checked, it will be none. This exact same code is for email place, and for income, it's the same thing except it's for the check Y state. This is how I was changing the titles on the X and Y axis. So check Y state for variable 4.get, it'll set it to expenses, revenue, and finally taxes. Because these are also similar, I've just created a region and I'm just going to collapse them. Now I have two new functions, plot API and change geometry. But before I get to those, let me show you. Here I have the new button that shows the plot diagram. It's the same as the other button. The only difference is that it calls the change geometry function, which I've created up here. I'm going to go over this in a bit. And the menus are the same, but here is where the checkboxes are. So I've created my variables. var1 is an integer, var2 is an integer, all of these are integers. Now, I've created a Ktinker check button. They're inside expanding frame, and they have a variable set to var1, var2, var3, var4, var5, var6. So the variables that are created here are assigned here. These variables determine whether the checkbox has been checked or not. So if it's 1, this is going to be a 1, and if it is, then up here, if it's 1, my variable check X state is going to be set to name. And it does the same for the other 6 checkboxes, it's the same thing. And over here I have a separator which just creates the line between the X's and the Y's. And yeah, so I'll put this in a region called checkboxes. So let me go over the let me go over the beef of this. Okay, change geometry. When I click the button, this is what's called. It connects to the Boolean toggle, and it also calls plot API, which I will go over in a bit. I don't need this anymore. Actually, I might, just for debugging. Anyways, if toggle is set to false, which it will be by default, because when you run the program, the script, it's set to false in the... It's set to false right in its initialization. So, if it's false, which it will be, the geometry will be changed. Instead of 758 to 800, it will be changed to 1000 and 1300. it will show the hidden frame, expanding frame 2.grid. This will be unhidden, and then toggle is set to false. It's set to true. This means the button has been clicked and toggle is now true. Else, if toggle is true and I click the button again, if I call this function again and toggle is true, it's going to reduce the geometry back to the original size. It's going to hide the plane. It's going to hide the frame that has the graph plot. It's going to close. It's going to. Pretty sure I deleted this before. Or maybe it's meant to be here. Sorry, I haven't tested out this one out as much as I have in the previous videos, but anyway, it's going to close the graph just in case the graph is still open, and it's going to set toggle back to false. So that's all change of geometry does. Now, since every time this function is called, plot API is also called. So this one connects to the global variable drawn, which is a boolean. It creates two new lists, xlist and ylist. Now if drawn is equal to false, which it will be by default because up here it's also set to false, we're going to call PlotShow, which outputs from our database these 6 lists, which contain the names, emails, incomes, expenses, revenues, and taxes. And these 6 lists will be assigned to variables name, email, income, expense, revenue, and tax in order. So this one outputs name first, name is going to go in first, email second, and these are all lists. Now it's going to create a variable f, which is figure. This is the size of our graph, so the graph is set by 8 by 5, has a resolution of 80 and a color which is set to black. Then the plot object that I have imported, because if you remember up here, import MathPlotLib.pyplot as PLT. This PLT is now going to be set to the figure.add subplot. So this plot is now added to the figure. Basically the graph is now set inside the plot area where the frame is. Now I have 2 if statements. First one, if check xState is equal to name, the x-axis, the list here, is going to be set to name, which is the name from the plot show. So the plot list here is going to be set to the x list, and the x-axis label .text is going to be equal to names. So the variable that I said, the var1. Sorry, let me just go back down and show you. Don't think it's here. It's up here. Okay, x-axis label. The text is empty here, but when this if statement is checked, it will call that text box and set it equal to names. So this is how I'm changing the names of the axes in real time. Else if it's set to email, the x list will take in the email list from PlotShow, and the name will be set to emails. Otherwise, if check x state is empty, this will be set to none, and the text will again be set to none. The reason I got the error earlier is probably related to this. I'm going to have to refine this in a little bit. Now this goes over the same thing, this time with check y state. So if it's income, the y list is set to income, the income list, and then the text is set to incomes. Same for the expenses, the revenue, the taxes, and if it's empty, it's going to set it to none. This is just for debugging. I can really just comment this out for now. It's why you were showing those. It's why I was showing the output here in the terminal, in case you guys didn't see it. Anyway, plt.plot. This is what actually puts the information into the graph. So it's going to plot xlist and ylist. So after these f statements have given xlist and ylist the lists, For example, if name is checkmarked, xlist will be the name list from PlotShow, and the ylist, if the income box is checkmarked, the ylist will be the income list from PlotShow, from our database. And then this will draw it out. Then we have canvas, which is set to figure canvas tk_arg. It's going to take in the f variable figure, and it's going to be set inside expanding frame 2. So this basically takes the plot graph and sticks it inside our frame from Ktinker. Then it's going to draw the frame, the canvas in the frame, and then it's going to position it. Get tk widget hack, it tells it where to position it. And then this one is for the toolbar. The toolbar you saw me, move the graph with. Does the same thing, and it connects to canvas. It's inside the expanding frame 2. It's set to auto update and it's positioned in. And then drawn is set to true because this is only meant to work once if there is no graph already there. Therefore drawn is set to true because once everything is now made, the graph is set, the drawn will be true because it has been drawn. Now if the drawn is true and this function is called, drawn is going to be set to false, the figure is going to be closed, the canvas widget is going to be destroyed, and the toolbar is going to be destroyed. This basically empties out the graph so that when I recall everything in here, because drawn is going to be false again, and once it calls it again, the graph can be empty for it to update to the new information. Let me show you what that means. By default, drawn is false. Check name and income, and it shows you the graph. Empty these out. However, because the graph is now drawn, because the graph is now made, drawn is going to be true. Because it's true, when I click show plot diagram again, it's going to close it, but it's also going to destroy the graph, everything about it. And now when I click these buttons again, a new graph is here. Instead of there being a second graph underneath it, or any other extra graphs being made. This basically ensures there's always one graph every single time this is called, instead of these graphs being stacked on top of each other, which slows down the computer a lot and takes up a lot of memory and basically causes a crash. So that's why I have everything in the else statement here to close all that down. So yeah, that's basically been all the changes I've done so far. I'm going to upload this new code into the GitHub file. I'm not going to post a GitHub file yet. We have one more video to go over where I'm going to create the MVC, the third script, organize everything to an MVC format, and basically finish off this project, because after this I want to move on into something else. Anyways, I hope you guys have a good one. Peace out.